No one saw this coming. After decades of silence, Frank Sutton has finally revealed the shocking truth about the horrific tensions on the set of Gomer Pyle. What he kept hidden for years will completely change how you view Sergeant Carter. Are you ready to confront this painful truth? Unfulfilled dream and real combat experience. Frank Sutton, 1923 to 1974, was an American actor best known for his role as the cantankerous but lovable Sergeant Vince Carter in the hit sitcom Gomer Pyle, USMC. 1964 to 1969. Although he was publicly known for his portrayal of a loud and disciplined military officer, Sutton's real life was far more complex and profound. Frank Sutton's biggest dream was to become a Marine. When World War II broke out, he quickly enlisted. However, a color blindness test prevented him from joining the Marine Corps, dealing a heavy blow to his childhood dream. Undeterred, he joined the U.S. Army and ended the war in the Pacific Theater, participating in 14 separate amphibious assaults. He was a seasoned World War II veteran, having served in the U.S. Army in the Pacific, and was awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart, a little-known fact that contrasted with his on-screen Marine persona. Sutton was also a keen learner, graduating with honors in drama from Columbia University, and always carried philosophy and literature books to read between takes. This was the experience of a seasoned soldier, not a pampered actor. He was awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. What few know is that the actor who played a Marine on TV couldn't join the Marines, but shed blood for his country in the Army. Throughout his career, Frank Sutton always yearned to escape the shadow of Sergeant Carter to showcase his versatile acting abilities. He found joy and authenticity in stage theater, where he could play various roles without being typecast. His sudden passing in 1974 at the age of 50 left a complex legacy, but ultimately revealed a private, intellectual, and resilient man who far surpassed the famous character he embodied. Fame and inner conflict. When Gomer Pyle, USMC, aired in 1964, audiences were instantly captivated by Sutton's authoritative presence. His portrayal of Sergeant Carter was so authentic that many assumed it was his true personality. This assumption haunted Sutton throughout his life. The public expected him to be aggressive, gruff, and constantly tense. However, the truth was that he was a private, even shy person who preferred reading to brawling and hated being typecast. Friends and colleagues described him as a deep, well-read, and serious actor. Behind the camera, the real Frank Sutton retreated into the background, overshadowed by the legend of Sergeant Carter. He rarely spoke about his military service. When asked about his combat experience, he simply said, "I just remember being scared and trying not to show it," a statement that revealed everything. Sergeant Carter's anger and gruffness weren't just acting, they were echoes of deeper, unhealed wounds. Confronting typecasting and the desire for change. Why was Sutton so private about his war record? Perhaps it was humility, perhaps unhealed pain. The role of Sergeant Carter, though comedic, was built upon the scars of a man who had experienced far worse. What the public didn't see off-camera reveals an even more surprising truth. Frank Sutton, in the public eye, was the embodiment of the hot-headed, loud soldier. In real life, he was completely different, quiet, intellectual, and private. When the cameras stopped rolling, an unexpected side of him emerged. He wasn't just an actor, he was a deep thinker, curious about the world. Before his fame, he had already laid the groundwork for a different kind of success, returning to Columbia University, earning a drama degree, and graduating with honors. Education wasn't a backup plan, it was an integral part of who he was. Colleagues remarked on how different he was in private, often reading instead of socializing. He brought novels, biographies, even philosophy books to the set. He craved intellectual stimulation beyond punchlines. He joked that he had the biggest mouth in showbiz, but the quietest mind, a strange paradox. In a political interview in the late 60s, when asked about the state of the nation, He humbly stated he was no more an authority than the elevator operator. He knew people attributed Carter's confidence to him, but he didn't feel entitled to speak for the American public. Backstage pressure and conflict with Jim Nabors. Frank Sutton's refusal to play the Hollywood game sometimes displeased producers. He didn't chase headlines, attend every party, or give frequent interviews. It wasn't arrogance, but a certain detachment. He found joy in his family, the theater, and literature. For him, fame was just noise. The pressure didn't come from Hollywood, but from within. His relationship with Jim Nabors, who played Gomer Pyle, was initially quite balanced. Sutton's energy complemented Nabors' quiet demeanor, but over time, it became clear they operated on two different frequencies. Sutton was a perfectionist. Every scene, every line mattered. He brought intensity to rehearsals. Nabors often performed more spontaneously, while Sutton prepared as if for a Broadway play. Rumors began to circulate. Colleagues whispered about chilly moments between takes. Sutton became visibly irritated when scenes were too silly or dragged on. He hated wasting time and demanded precision. When precision was lacking, his discomfort simmered. He didn't explode publicly, but his eyes said it all. One producer recalled, Sutton had a temper, but it was quiet. You didn't want to be in the room when he stopped talking. Jim Nabors was, at the time, entering a new phase of fame with his singing career. Concerns grew as Nabors' attention became divided. Some covertly accused Nabors of half-hearted performances. Sutton, who prided himself on discipline, took it personally. He felt the show deserved full dedication. This clashed with Nabors' distractions. The tension escalated, not with shouting or drama, but with long silences, more intense rehearsals, and separate dressing rooms. It wasn't open warfare, but it wasn't friendship either. By the fourth season, insiders said they rarely spoke unless the cameras were rolling. Utterly professional, but a cold professionalism that made others uneasy. However, none of this showed on screen. Sutton was a master of control. No matter the backstage tension, he flipped a switch when the director yelled action. That discipline, ironically, came from his real military background. He never let emotion affect his duty. But everyone around could feel it. The role that made him a star also imprisoned him. Sutton began to wonder how long he could maintain that role. The character was eating away at his true self. The loud, aggressive sergeant became an armor, but armor can also become heavy. Sudden passing and legacy. Jim Nabors' decision to leave was something Sutton had foreseen, but he wasn't prepared for what came next, a powerful shock. When Nabors announced his departure from Gomer Pyle, the cast and crew were stunned, none more so than Frank Sutton. For years, Sutton had built his life around the show. He didn't just memorize lines, he became Sergeant Carter. The role consumed his time, shaped his public identity, and in many ways defined his purpose. And then, it all disappeared. Nabors stated he was tired. 5 seasons of the show, reruns, separate projects, and national fame had exhausted him. He wanted to focus on singing, stage work, and his personal peace. The network tried to persuade Sutton to stay, even considering a spin-off series centered on Sergeant Carter. Sutton was intrigued but cautious. He didn't want to be trapped forever. But the industry only saw him as that role. Scripts poured in, all wanting another angry sergeant, another shouting authority figure. He refused most of them. I've played that man already. I don't need to be him. What followed was a strange, quiet period in Sutton's life. He wasn't unemployed, but he wasn't in high demand either. Offers came intermittently. He appeared in a few variety shows, dabbled in theater, and did commercials, but nothing resonated like Gomer Pyle. The fame, once brilliant, began to fade. It was hard to adapt. Even harder was public perception. Wherever he went, he was still Sergeant Carter. Fans shouted famous lines, children gave military salutes, adults asked him to yell. What started as admiration quickly turned into something else. A cage. No matter how hard he tried to move forward, people only saw the drill sergeant. They didn't see the Army veteran, the Columbia graduate, the stage actor. They only saw the mask. Sutton's family said that during this time he became more withdrawn, not bitter, just quiet. He poured his energy into local theater productions, craving the authenticity and respect that TV no longer provided. On stage, he could be someone else, not a joke or a caricature, just an actor doing his job. Audiences loved it. Though the crowds were smaller, the applause was more meaningful. The truth revealed. The pressure never completely vanished. The expectations, the typecasting, the shadow of the role that had made him famous but never let him go. And on June 28, 1974, just as Sutton seemed to find peace on stage, fate had other plans. He walked into his dressing room between two shows in Shreveport, Louisiana, a city buzzing with the excitement of live theater. He was starring in Love, a sharp romantic comedy, a world away from the military character that had clung to him for years. This was supposed to be a new beginning, a new chapter, but he never came out. He collapsed almost instantly, a massive heart attack. His sudden passing shocked the nation. Fans couldn't believe it. How could the strong, resilient Sergeant Carter just be gone? But those who knew Sutton weren't surprised by the ensuing silence. It was how he lived. No scandals, no media storm, just quiet dedication and then silence. He died doing what he loved, performing on stage before real audiences, far from the glare of Hollywood. For his closest circles, it was tragic, yet also poetic and fitting. Frank Sutton always carried the air of a man wrestling with his own fame. All the attention Gomer Pyle brought also trapped him in a single image, an image he had tried to transcend for years. Still, tributes poured in. Jim Nabors was stunned and emotional, issuing a short statement calling Sutton an excellent actor and a good man. Beyond the headlines and accolades, there was a quiet realization among Sutton's fans. They only knew half the story. They had seen the anger, the bellowing, the confidence of the drill sergeant. What they hadn't seen was the war hero, the scholar, the husband, the father. The man whose greatest performance was perhaps masking the burden he carried. His family kept things private. A quiet funeral, no red carpet, no cameras, just friends and relatives. Sutton's wife, Toby, whom he married in 1946, never spoke publicly about her husband's struggle with fame. Years later, their son Joe, a successful playwright, said his father was more than a character actor. He lived a full life and paid the price for that role's success. Frank Sutton's legacy is complex. To millions, he will forever be Sergeant Carter, giving orders and stealing scenes. But behind that iconic role was a man desperate to be seen for who he truly was. A man who served his country, read Chekhov between takes, and loved the stage more than the spotlight. And ultimately, he perhaps achieved what he truly wanted, not fame, but respect. Not notoriety, but authenticity. The kind of legacy that doesn't need to shout to endure. The echo of truth. Still, a question lingers. What really happened on set? And did Sutton ever truly forgive what Gomer Pyle took from him? Decades after Frank Sutton's death, his legacy largely remained unchanged. Fans remembered him with fondness. Gomer Pyle reruns kept his name alive, and his character became an icon of classic American television. But the deeper story of the man behind the role stayed locked behind polite obituaries and public silence, until recently. In 2023, a forgotten audio interview surfaced, quietly uploaded by a university archive while digitizing old tapes. It was recorded in the early 70s, just a few years before Sutton's passing, and it revealed something astonishing. For nearly 50 years, Sutton had never publicly spoken about the tensions on the Gomer Pyle set. Not once. But in this interview, recorded during a break from a stage play, he finally let his guard down. The interviewer asked a simple question, "Do you miss the show?" There was a long pause. Then Sutton said, "I miss the work. I miss doing something people cared about." He continued carefully without bitterness. "But the show, no, it typecast me. You know how some people get typecast? I became that typecast." Jim Nabors was good at what he did, but we were never close. We worked differently, we thought differently, I respected him, but it was never easy. The tape crackled and Sutton chuckled, a tired sound. I was yelling half the time because I was frustrated, not with him, with the work, and how small it made everything. That one line, how small it made everything, landed like a punch to the gut. The man America saw as larger than life was quietly suffocated by the very role that brought him fame. More small revelations trickled out in the years that followed. Fellow cast member Ronnie Shell spoke at 2024 TV reunion and admitted Sutton struggled more than people realized. He was a private man, very serious about his craft. But I think he was lonely, not in a sad way, just detached. Even Jim Nabors, before his death in 2017, had hinted in an interview that Sutton didn't love fame the way most in the industry did. He loved the work. That's what kept him going. In an age of viral documentaries and social media nostalgia, Sutton's story is beginning to re-emerge, not just as a footnote to Gomer Pyle, but as a cautionary tale. A reminder of how fame can elevate a person and imprison them at the same time. Of how the loudest characters sometimes belong to the quietest souls. For many fans, this overlooked facet of Frank Sutton only deepened their respect for him. The decorated soldier became a punchline, but never let it define him. The Columbia graduate played a buffoon, but never stopped reading, thinking, growing. The man who roared on screen, but lived in near silence off it. Now, decades later, Frank Sutton's voice is finally being heard. Not through the bellow of a drill sergeant, but through something far more powerful, the truth. Frank Sutton never wanted to be famous. He wanted to be great. And in his own way he was, but not for the reasons people thought. It wasn't the roar, the anger, or the perfectly timed comedic lines that made him unforgettable. It was the depth he carried beneath all that noise. A veteran who turned pain into strength. A disciplined actor trapped inside a cartoon character. A man whose silence spoke louder than any of Sergeant Carter's shouts. His story isn't just about Hollywood. It's about identity. About what happens when the world loves a version of you that doesn't feel like you at all. Sutton spent his later years trying to reclaim that identity through small plays, quiet towns, and moments of true connection. And perhaps that's what makes his story so powerful now. Because in a world obsessed with shouting the loudest, Sutton's life was an act of quiet rebellion. He chose authenticity over attention, craft over fame, truth over comfort. How do you feel about Frank Sutton's story? Does understanding more about his life change how you view his role as Sergeant Carter? If this story gave you a new perspective on a Hollywood legend, feel free to hit like, leave a comment with your thoughts or memories of Frank Sutton. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that dig deeper than the headlines. Because sometimes, the loudest voices are hiding the quietest truths.